Hey guys, I felt like doing a little post about autism, neurodivergence. Um, the idea was more or less prompted when I've listened quite a few times now to the telepathy tape podcast, which describes the beautiful world of nonverbal autistic children. The podcast is hosted by Kai Dickens, and she was already on the Joe Rogan podcast, and that those telepathy tape episodes, they left a deep imprint, and it was almost psychedelic to listen to these stories. At least if you let it in, if you actually choose to experience what is being said and kind of acknowledge that there's some truth to it. Whenever I hear something of fates or of lives where someone is limited or somewhat quote unquote dysfunctional or has any type of limitation, whether it's eyesight, whether it's hearing, whether it's autism, whether it's ADHD or anything that gives that person a particular perspective on life. If you're blind, well, you're gonna highly develop your faculties in terms of hearing, and so your world changes and your reality changes. And with those telepathy tapes where they describe those nonverbal autistic kids, um, I was deeply moved. Again, my perspective is always the soul has chosen a particular set and setting for your life to experience, to access a set of experience which is particularly perhaps quite unique, and because your soul wishes to experience a particular thing. So now, in the case of a nonverbal autistic child or person, I mean, I'm not sure if you've listened to the telepathy tapes, but that world is wild and mesmerizing. They're kind of bridging both worlds, the physical and non-physical, with capabilities and abilities that kind of go far beyond what can be described with words. It's insane. So I'm just in awe of us, of souls that choose that such particular circumstances to incarnate, and as mentioned by some of these kids on the podcast, they chose to be here, and they chose to be here for a particular reason, which is to increase the frequency of Earth. To be role models, examples for people who try to relate to what they're going through and what they're saying, and the wisdom they carry from the other realm, which we will always have access to, like after death, or like our higher selves are obviously rooted in the same dimension that they are. They just kept the foot in while we planted both feet on planet Earth. Um, and so on social media, and especially on TikTok, I think there's quite a few people, that come forth and describe what it means to be diagnosed with neurodivergence, for instance autism, when they're adults, and they mention how it changes something for them, changes their lives, and I completely acknowledge that. um, I'm not entirely sure what it changes to be suddenly diagnosed. I have these kind of ambiguous relationship with um, types of medical diagnoses, although I'm a medical scientist. To me, coming back to the Kybalion that I already mentioned, the principle of polarity. So autism, we already talk about even medically, like autism is on a spectrum. So so that goes really well with the principle of polarity, where everything is on, nothing is black and white. You know, you can be more or less autistic. You can be highly functioning autistic. Then you can be at that extreme. You can be a nonverbal autistic child with really heavy dysfunctions or apparent dysfunctions, while you highly function in different realms. Right? That would blow your mind. And so autism is like a perfect example of a chosen setting on that polarity scale. And I was wondering, what is that scale? You know, what is that polarity scale? And to me, it's almost, although there are you know, there's medical ways to kind of put you on a particular spot on that scale. From a soul's perspective, to me, what resonates most is, okay, how much do we choose our minds to be fully focused on the material world? Because to me, what I feel these kids are going through is like, somehow their minds are not, they're not here. Probably to a large extent still in the non-physical, where they access information that we don't have access to. And on that autism neurodivergence spectrum, you you frequently, or at least that's what I perceive, you frequently observe people with that are highly skilled in different areas. So they can have savant syndrome, you know, or they can, you have these kids, you fly them over a city, then they're able to draw that city with a high level of precision. Like, how is that even possible? So that scale that the soul chooses is, okay, I don't want to be absorbed by all that physical stuff. I still want to be deeply anchored in something else, where I have still access to all these beautiful abilities that I think we will all regain access to once we pass over. But it's quite, it made me think a lot, you know. and and I also realized that, like, the telepathy tapes, you know, how it was received by the larger community. Of course, I think there was a largely positive feedback, but there are also outlets were highly skeptical, that do not want to accept that this is actually truth. They do not want to accept that these kids, they don't have any agenda. Why would they? Like, they here to shine a light. Of course, you can, it's your choice whether you want to accept that light or not. That's completely fine. But I was quite of amazed how closed off, so close minded some, still a significant amount of the world's population is, or perhaps, like, it's, I'm not sure whether media outlets really reflect that accurately, but at least there's still an unwillingness to accept that this is happening, this is truth. um, which I don't quite understand, because it's actually a beautiful thing, right? Because all these kids have, the message these kids really transmit is that we're all the same, you know. We just chose to reincarnate with a different set of abilities. Yeah, it's quite an it's quite an amazing world these kids live in. And I think you can extend how you perceive, or your perception of what is being transmitted through the telepathy tapes. You can obviously, and I'll get back to that, like in other posts, whether it's life after death, death and rebirth, people that basically say what happened to them, when they had the near death experience, where they went, how they came back. Children that still remember where they came from, they still remember why they chose their parents. There's no agenda there. You need to be kind of ill willed to see an agenda. But those stories of kids, talking to their moms, I'm not sure when it vanishes, but like in the first, like whenever they can speak. Ah, mommy, daddy, do you know why I chose you? Hmm. There's no agenda. There's no ill intent in there. Like, why would we discard that as evidence for what is actually real and what isn't? And what also deeply resonated with me, where I felt like I had goosebumps, I almost felt teary, is those nonverbal autistic children, or adults, young adults. They always talk about nonverbal communication. The podcast is obviously called telepathy tapes. So there's telepathy going on, and I always that resonated so deeply with me. I've always, like, in a hidden way, communicated non-verbally. I energetically communicate with my environment. I don't say anything. If I pass a homeless person, I always send them something. I whether it's an energetic acknowledgement, it's a greeting, it's a I acknowledge you here. Hello, I see you. Um, and it doesn't matter that it's just like perceivedly, I perceive it as to be a one-way street. I basically, to me, it just feels good to be in a state like that, where I just send out energy to things, to doesn't matter, it can be people, it can be vegetation, animals. It's like it's the acknowledgement of, we're here in the same reality. You're made out of something that's alive. You have your set of consciousness. Perhaps it's a bit more limited than mine, but it doesn't matter. It's like we're all made out of consciousness, and our, there's a channel that wants to be open. And so it deeply resonated with me when it's basically said it's so much easier to communicate non-verbally. So much can be said. Like, if you transmit an energy, or telepathically, I guess were always discussing also transmitting a vision, or transmitting something else. So much is being said. How long would it take you to describe fully accurately describe a picture? It would take so many words, but if you just transmit the picture, it's instantaneous. How long would it take verbally to describe an emotion? You would have to describe the entire context of how that emotion came up, so that people can actually just try to, okay, what is that emotion? Hang on, let me try to figure it out for myself. But if you send the emotion, it's instantaneous. You immediately, everything is being said. And I mean, interestingly, and it's kind of a side note, but if you hear people that describe having had alien encounters, that's exactly how extraterrestrial, if they should they exist, communicate as well, telepathically. Everything is being said instantaneously. People describing encounters where they immediately knew that there was no ill intent. Why? Because the energy was sent. It's instantaneous. You can feel the energy. There's nothing has to be said. Everything is felt right away. Everything is known. And I'm not sure what sure that what I'm not sure what the telepathy tapes kind of suggest. Do they suggest that we might all move in that direction? You know, maybe it's like a skill set. Have we lost it somehow? Can we regain it? Can we do more of that as verbal people? But is there something else we can actually communicate in a different way, just non-verbally? And so yeah, that's why I got a bit emotional, like listening to all these accounts. It's just there's so much beauty in there, and it makes me. I just long to be in a state like that. Maybe it's longing. We all long to be home. All long to be going back to actual being love and loved. Um, the last thing I'd like to just to share is an experience I had, I believe, with a nonverbal autistic child. That experience came back up when I was listening to that podcast. It's I was sitting on a plane. It was a very short plane ride. I think it was from Wellington to Auckland in New Zealand, just an hour, like whatever, 45 minutes. And there was this what I believe was a nonverbal. At least she made noises, but she couldn't really speak. I didn't hear her speak for at least an hour. She sat next to me on this plane. I was having an aisle seat because I'm fairly tall. She was in the middle, and then I believe her father was had the window seat. And well, I think it was after a meeting, so I'm like, my first reaction, unfiltered, I'm like, oh no, I just want to chill out on this plane. And I could already tell she was wiggly. She was moving a lot. She couldn't control. She had not no fine motor skills. She was carrying with her this heavily armored, padded iPad type of thing. It had a thick kind of rim around it. I think it was kind of plastic type of thing. So I think it allowed her to grab onto it, and I think it also allowed that kind of iPad thingy not to get broken when she probably when it would probably fall quite regularly, I would assume. And so she was sitting next to me, moving a lot, bumping into me quite a few times. And after that initial reaction, I just like, oh, hang on, like let's just and I started to do what I usually do. I acknowledged her non-verbally. I was like, hi, I see you. It's okay. You can bump into me. It's no big deal. Uh, she was fairly tiny. Right? She must have been maybe around 10 years old. She was tiny, and she couldn't control herself. And so we took off, and she continued to move. She was doing something with her iPad or her tablet, and then she was stopping, and then she was doing other things. She was moving. Um, I appreciate that her father was actually fairly calm. I think some parents sometimes they try to make everything right on a plane ride. Oh, please stop, stop, stop. No, I think he was fairly chill. He knew what was happening. There was nothing he could do. So I appreciated that actually. But after what the lasting impression of that encounter, um, and that always makes me very emotional. Like it must have been mid-flight. Um, she gently she stopped wiggling for a moment and put her hand on my leg, on my thigh, and she was dead still. She didn't move at all, and there was this warmth coming from her hand. I could feel it on my thigh. Um, and she didn't move. Like she couldn't stop moving for half an hour, but for that she kind of stopped. Um, it was only for maybe 5 to 10 seconds max, and I don't know what she was thinking, or whether she was trying to communicate something. Um, but it was such a striking contrast with her unable to just control herself, but then I'm not sure whether that was her way to say, to kind of acknowledge our connection. And then she took her hand back, and then she started to wiggle again, and the, uh, more was communicated in those 5 to 10 seconds than she could have ever said during the entire flight. Was she verbal? Um, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that kind of beauty. Um, yeah, and that really came up when I listened back to those podcasts. And we need to look deeper than just the surface. There are souls that came here with particular circumstances because they wanted to teach us something. They come here to teach with enormous limitations, and we just see the limitations, or most of them just see the limitations. The society just sees the limitation. But if we actually listen a bit, there's so much that can be learned from what they are here to communicate, and we can access a little bit more of the divine, being around and acknowledging the presence of such beings. Yeah, so I felt that I wanted to say something, to share that kind of emotion with you, and perhaps it resonates with you.